600 men riding straight toward death, not by accident, not be ambush, but be order. In 1854, during the Battle of Balaclava, a single miscommunication would send an entire British cavalry unit into one of the most infamous moments in military history. They could see the danger. Cannons to the left, cannons to the right, and directly ahead. More guns waiting. They knew, and yet they charged. Anyway, this is not just a story of war. It is a story of obedience, of leadership failure, and of courage in the face of certain death. A moment where discipline overruled logic, and history was written in smoke and steel. Welcome to History Ledger, where we bring you real stories from real history, told with depth, accuracy, and meaning. Today's story: the Valley of Death. The charge of the Light Brigade. As the guns fell silent, smoke drifted slowly across the valley, revealing the aftermath of the charge. What had once been a thunderous battlefield was now eerily quiet. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, men and horses alike, alongside broken equipment and shattered remnants of battle. From the ashes, small groups of survivors began to emerge, riding back toward their lines. Their formation was gone, their numbers nearly halved, and their expressions marked by shock and exhaustion. They had done what was asked of them, and somehow they had lived. Of the approximately 600 men who had charged into the valley, nearly half were killed, wounded, or missing. Entire units were devastated, and the loss of horses crippled the brigade's strength. The charge had lasted only minutes, but its consequences would endure far longer. Back at the British lines, disbelief spread among officers. Questions arose quickly. How could such a disaster have occurred, and why had it not been stopped? Responsibility moved up the chain of command. Was it Lord Raglan, who issued the vague order? Was it Louis Nolan, whose delivery failed to clarify its intent? Or Lord Lucan and Lord Cardigan, who executed the command despite its flaws? In truth, it was a combination of all these factors of failure of communication, coordination, and leadership within a rigid system where orders were obeyed without question. When news of the charge reached Britain, the public reacted with shock and grief. Yet alongside the outrage came something unexpected. The courage displayed by the soldiers could not be ignored. 600 men had ridden into overwhelming fire without breaking, without retreating, and without hesitation. The event soon transcended its failure and became a symbol of bravery and sacrifice. This transformation was cemented by the words of Alfred Lord Tennyson, whose poem immortalized the charge. He captured both the tragedy and the honor in a single, unforgettable idea that the soldier's duty was not to question, but to act. Through his words, the charge of the Light Brigade was remembered not as a disaster, but as a legend. And yet, beneath the poetry and the glory, the truth remains. This was a charge that should never have happened, a moment where courage could not overcome error, and where honor came at an immense cost. The charge of the Light Brigade endures, not because it succeeded, but because it revealed the strength of those who fought and the consequences of flawed leadership. It stands as a reminder that history is not only shaped by great victories, but also by tragic mistakes and by the people who bear their cost. The order had been given, and now there was no hesitation, only silence. 600 men of the Light Brigade sat mounted in perfect formation, facing a valley that had become a trap. At the far end stood Russian artillery, while cannons lined both sides of the valley, all aimed inward. The soldiers could see it clearly. There was no cover, no support, and no escape. This was not a tactical advance, it was a direct charge into overwhelming fire. They exchanged glances, tightened their grips, and understood the truth. Something had gone terribly wrong. At the front, Lord Cardigan gave the command to advance. The line began to move slowly, then steadily, then faster. The ground trembled beneath the synchronized thunder of hooves as the brigade accelerated from a walk to a full gallop. Then came the first blast. Russian artillery erupted with a deafening roar, and shells tore into the advancing line. Explosions scattered dirt and smoke as men and horses were struck down. Still, the formation pressed forward. There was no turning back. The valley became a killing zone. Fire rained down from three sides as artillery crews worked relentlessly. Horses collapsed mid-stride. Riders were thrown violently to the ground, and chaos consumed the charge. Yet discipline held. The surviving cavalrymen did not scatter. They did not retreat. They continued forward because that was their duty. Among them, a realization spread silent, but undeniable that a grave mistake had been made. As later captured in words that would echo through history, someone had blundered. Despite the devastation, the brigade closed the distance. The Russian guns loomed larger as artillery crews scrambled to reload. Then, against all odds, the cavalry reached the enemy lines. Sabers flashed as close combat erupted. For a brief moment, the impossible seemed to happen. The British riders broke through the artillery position, but there was no support behind them. No reinforcements followed. They were alone, deep within enemy lines, and surrounded. Russian forces quickly regrouped. Infantry advanced. Cavalry counterattacked, and the survivors were forced to turn back. What had begun as a charge became a desperate fight for survival. The return through the valley proved even more deadly. With fewer men and mounting exhaustion, they faced the same deadly gauntlet once again. By the time they emerged, the brigade had been shattered. The battlefield was left littered with fallen men and horses, and the cost of the charge was painfully clear. On the morning of October 25, 1854, during the Battle of Balaclava, a cold wind swept across the rugged hills of Crimea as British forces prepared for battle. Below the ridgelines, cavalry horses stamped against the frost-covered ground while soldiers tightened their grip on sabers, disciplined and ready. They had no idea that within the hour, many of them would be riding towards certain death. The battle was part of the larger Crimean War, where British and Allied forces faced off against the Russian Empire. As the conflict unfolded, Russian troops began seizing Turkish defensive positions and hauling away captured artillery on alarming sight for British command. Elevated position, British commander Lord Raglan observed the battlefield through his telescope. He saw Russian forces removing the guns and understood the danger immediately. If those artillery pieces were lost, the balance of the battle could shift. Acting quickly, he issued an urgent order for the cavalry to advance and prevent the enemy from taking the guns. But the order, though clear in his mind, was dangerously vague on paper. From his vantage point, the battlefield made sense, but from the valley below, it did not. The rain, distance, and limited visibility distorted the reality on the ground. The message was entrusted to Captain Louis Nolan, a skilled but impatient officer. He rode swiftly down into the valley to deliver the command to Lord Lucan. When Lucan read the order, confusion immediately set in. The instructions did not clearly identify which guns were to be targeted. Ahead of him lay a long valley, flanked by Russian artillery on both sides, with additional guns positioned at the far end. The situation made little tactical sense. Lucan questioned Nolan, but instead of clarifying, Nolan gestured vaguely forward, indicating the distant artillery. Whether through frustration or assumption, the message was not properly explained. Despite his doubts, Lucan passed the order to his subordinate, Lord Cardigan, a man known for strict discipline and unquestioning obedience. Cardigan assessed the scene before him. A deadly corridor lined with enemy guns and recognized the danger. There was no cover, no support, and no strategic advantage. Yet, the order stood. Officers sensed something was wrong, and the soldiers felt it too. This was not a standard maneuver, it was a mistake. But in an army where orders were followed, not debated, no one stopped what was about to happen. Within minutes, 600 cavalrymen would form their lines, stare into a valley filled with artillery, and prepare to ride forward into what history would soon call the Valley of Death. They were given an order. They followed it without hesitation, and in doing so, they rode into legend. The charge of the Light Brigade was not a victory. It was a mistake. A failure of communication, a failure of leadership, but also a moment of extraordinary human courage. As Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote, "There's not two reasons why. There's but to do and die." And perhaps that is why we still remember them, not for what they achieved, but for what they endured. Asterisk. But this raises a deeper question. How many moments in history were shaped, not by strategy, but by misunderstanding? If you want to explore more real stories like this, stories where small decisions change the course of history, make sure to subscribe to History Ledger. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember, history is not just what happened, it's what it cost.